City of Tallahassee Ethics Board. It is Tuesday, September the 18th. It's 4:06. We're in the Commission chamber. We have a new sound system, so I want to remind everyone, do not point your mics straight up or you will get feedback. And please, unlike I do, please do try to talk into the mic. You will see we have on the agenda an executive session, which we will try to get to fairly quickly. Just before we do that, I am going to take any testimony from any members of the public who want to talk about anything, since I do not know how long we'll be in that executive session. I don't want to make everybody sit and wait for us in case you have things you would rather do, like anything. So the first item on the agenda is the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any questions or corrections on the minutes? Seeing none, Ms. McNeil moves the minutes, and Mr. Smith seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Minutes are approved. The next thing we will do is go to the Ethics Officer report. As always, we'll have a series of items in this report, and we'll stop at the end of each one. Ms. Meadowskeef, you're recognized on the summary of your activities for the last month.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. You'll note the activities undertaken since our last meeting. The Commission has resumed its normal meeting schedule. So there was a meeting last Wednesday. There was a CRA board meeting, a budget hearing, and a full Commission meeting. There have also been various meetings as usual, and then preparation for the session today, the executive session. Also, I'll let you know that we had asked for the Commission to place on the November ballot addition to the charter that would allow us to have our 7th member. So that is being effectuated now. They're working right now with the supervisor to get that on the ballot, and it's going to have to be in Spanish as well. So that requirement is going to apply to that. So I just wanted to update the board on that. Will
you remind everyone this would get rid of the appointment by the judge and replace that with?
The appointment by the Public Defender's Office.
Okay,
so
the elected public defender.
That's correct.
Okay, any questions of Ms. Meadowskeef on that item? Seeing none, the second item is the tracking monthly report for September. We'll go through these. There are 4 items on the report. The complaint log, basically. Item 117 relates to use of city P cards. We've seen this for several months. It is pending, and we are still awaiting audit results, so that would remain pending. Item 143 is something on which we had requested additional fact-finding. Ms. Meadowskeef.
You're on 143, correct?
Yes, on 143.
Okay. So yes, this individual made the various allegations represented there, some related to intimidation of relatives that work here at the city. This person was also concerned about various processes here in the city, including budget, access to funds for his projects, and that projects are unfairly judged and different criteria are used for various projects. So the board asked me to conduct some preliminary fact-finding and just to provide some information related to that. So what I got was a summary of, this is in your agenda materials. It looks like attachment 8. Actually, no, first. Let me go. You're going to have to get past the utility reconnection policy because that relates to something else. So after you've gone past the utility reconnection, which we'll get to, you'll see something that says release and waiver of liability or the Community Initiatives Review Committee. This is one way that citizens can get funding for ideas they may have to assist the community in various needs. So if a project that a citizen comes up with doesn't neatly fit within, say, the CHSP process or any other way of getting funds, this was a relatively new process that was developed to assess various ideas, and that's the Community Initiatives Review Committee. And you'll recall, I think, several months back, an individual had an issue with how this process applied to that applicant's particular application. So the chair just asked me, can you provide the board members with not only this process, which you now have in front of you, and it's just a few questions that the individual answers about what their idea is and what problems it would solve, and then the committee makes a recommendation, either strongly recommend, consider, or provide developmental feedback to the presenter, which basically says, no, we're not going to do it at this time, but here's some tips for when you reapply. So that was the one process.
Before you go to the next one, based on the discussions you and I have had, did you find any indication that there was any legal sufficiency in an argument that would say that elected or appointed city officials have been misusing this process?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Now go to the second one.
Okay. Similarly, attachment 8 speaks to what's more familiar to everyone, which is the CHSP process, and that is for health services and human services funds, and there are various requirements for folks to be able to access those funds. COCA, which is the Council for Arts in the community, they also can allocate funding, and this is just an overview that I got from budget about how people go ahead and apply for those. And at the bottom, there's some examples of entities that have gotten them, and on the back there, you'll see that back in fiscal year 2018, they give out about $1 million a year to those various agencies. And so people can apply for those. Generally, those people have to be affiliated with not-for-profits, so 501c3. I think I actually have a board member that served on a CHSP committee, which she had to stop doing when she was appointed to this board. So that's another way to access funds. And then I think there should have been something in here about our budget schedule and the series of hearings on budgets. So
related to this complaint?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not seeing that in there right now. But
so anyway, there's plenty of factual background to
right.
educate the board members. The other part of this complaint related to a relative of the complainant who works for the city, and that relative was treated unfairly. You had some opportunity to look into that also?
Well, this individual actually has had 2 family members working for the city. That one family member has left to do other things, and the other person still does work here, but again, I don't think this meets the board's legal sufficiency threshold for any misuse of position, and further, if there was a human resources issue pursuant to our bylaws, those get referred to human relations. So that person is actually still employed. Go ahead.
So you're recommending closure on this combined complaint?
Yes.
Do any board members have a problem with that? I'm just going to say then we'll close it without objection. On item 144, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
144. Okay, this applies to the CRA, and this complainant, there was an initiative where an entity wanted to purchase some property which within the Frenchtown CRA, and there was actually a recommendation from staff to go ahead and purchase that property, and this individual believed that that was a bad idea, and vociferously objected to that. And ultimately, when it came in front of the CRA board last week, the commission voted to not sell the property. So in this case, the outcome was one that the complainant wanted. And he engaged in the process, and in this instance, it worked out. So there isn't legal sufficiency at this point to proceed. And then I think there's an open question for the board at some point to look at our jurisdiction over the CRA, because that is a separate legal entity within the city.
Okay, in terms of jurisdiction over the CRA, let's just pose that to our general counsel for a future meeting. Your recommendation on this item is closure. Do any members of the board have any questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe or any objection to closing this complaint? Without objection, we're closing at item 145.
Okay, finally, number 145 is an employee reported some harassing behavior that he was receiving from another employee, and that employee was concerned about his personal safety. So he contacted me, and pursuant to our bylaws, I referred the matter to HR, and I followed back up, and they had handled the issue with the two individuals. No one affiliated here with this complaint and this set of facts would fall within the board's jurisdiction. So because of that, I would recommend closure.
So this is more in the nature of a hotline call than an ethics
complaint. It was a hotline call.
Okay, let's just treat it as a hotline call. Next item is our monthly budget report. Does anyone have any questions? And Ms. Meadows-Keefe, is there anything on this that is any major variance from the prior months?
No, Mr. Chair, there is not.
Okay. Any questions, Ms. Meadows-Keefe? Moving on, the monthly public records report. And let's treat D&E together. There's this big monthly public records report that's, 12 pages long of all the public records requests. And then there is the report that the city, the E report that the city has prioritized, those things that sort of rise to a level that the elected and appointed officials might need to be aware of. So if we kind of look at them together, is there anything on these reports, and obviously with E being a subset of D, anything on these that anyone on the board wants to follow up on or wants Ms. Meadows-Keefe to get a copy of the response on? I'm sure that's English.
Sounds okay.
Okay, seeing none, that would move us to item F, which is the list of actions the city takes to enforce and teach ethics. We asked Ms. Meadows-Keefe for this at a prior meeting to go over those individual items where ethics is built into the process or where ethics is allowed in the process. So she goes through 8 specific things here. Is there anything you want to add to this memo, Ms. Meadows-Keefe? I think everybody's had a chance to read it.
At this moment in time, no. I think one thing I might have left off is periodic reminders about the existence of the Ethics and Fraud Hotline. That email went out several months ago, and I do remind employees about that at the orientation that I do.
Okay, and I think this would go kind of hand in hand with our letter that we authorized last month to send our appreciation to the city for putting some focus on ethics. And we will continue to watch what they do and continue to applaud them when they do well and ding them when they do poorly, I suppose. Item 3G is what's on the agenda is a preservation protocol. This relates to emails that are done other than directly on the city email system. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to describe to us what we have in front of us?
Just real fast, we had been talking about how the city is continuing to improve the process related to preservation of public records, that may exist on your personal phone or your computer, and the method by which you are to make sure that those are preserved in case there's public records requests. The most recent development there is that before the instruction was that you send the email like to yourself at your TalGov email account, or you might send that to your supervisor, et cetera. Now the city actually has a dedicated email address. So if you receive something on a private account that you want retained, you simply send that to retain, R-E-T-A-I-N, @talgov.com. And then you're supposed to go through and make sure that it actually went through and was delivered to that mailbox. So that'll facilitate the city being able to capture all of those records.
Okay, and I'll remind everybody that, on the board that we have a similar policy. If for instance, you send an email to Mr. Currington and you did it from your personal email account, we would ask you to copy that email either to Ms. Meadows-Keefe or to ethics@talgov.com. So we need to make sure that we preserve all of our electronic communications too, so that no one has to, if we ever get a request for public records, that you don't have to go searching through your personal emails, that we've got it all laid out in our processes. Oh, yes, and also in this, and I think I've somewhere skipped over it, we heard some concerns about, I skipped out on B, I apologize, the utility disconnects as it might relate to persons who have medical or physical problems, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe has some information. So jumping back to item 3B, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to walk us through that utilities disconnect policy, please?
Well, I did talk to the gentleman that's in charge of that, and he indicated to me that the city has one of the most lenient policies in terms of discontinuation of service, and they do try to give plenty of notice and work with folks, especially with payment plans, et cetera. And then they do have a rule there. Actually, it's a policy and procedure that sets out what happens when bills are due, late fee and service discontinuance. And there is a process by which they can ask for some help if they have medical conditions.
Okay, any questions of that? So we do have a process. I would note that it is an annual renewal. So if you know someone or you're contacted by someone who wants to protect their utilities from a disconnect, they do have to annually renew it. It requires basically a note from the doctor to do that. So there is some burden on the utility customer, but it's something the city has built into the process.
And just for the public, in case anyone's watching, it's called the Medical Alert Program. And it's 8914U, which is 8914968. And there's information on the website that talks about how you can actually get this applied to you.
And personally, I would just encourage people to use that, because there are a lot of situations, I think, where someone who doesn't think they would ever miss a payment might, because of a medical condition and children coming into town to help care for them and such, might end up missing a utility payment. So being signed up for this, if you are at all, if you have any disability, is probably just a good protection. It's a simple thing to do and would potentially avoid some catastrophes. Before we end, I'm going to kind of move on to the ethics officer report. I want to jump to item 8, which is the airport parking passes, because we've talked about it several times. We have a letter here that, as we've talked about, encourages the city to advise people who receive free parking passes for the airport that they should use those passes only for official government business. That, one, avoids concerns about just those passes being used inappropriately, and 2, avoids those passes being perceived as gifts, which might have to be reported by the gift giver or the gift recipient. Does anybody have any edits to that? I'd like to go ahead, since we've talked about this for about 3 or 4 months in a row now, to be able to go ahead and get this out. Colonel Grant.
Edits to what? we looking at? I'm looking at 8 here. This is the memo from the city attorney.
This is to the city attorney.
To the city.
Yes, this would be from us to the city attorney, encouraging them, since under the policies of the city manager basically can dictate the rules and regulations of the airport. So if the city manager says how the airport parking passes are to be used, then the airport rules and regulations would be amended to fit. We're not telling them how to do it or when to do it, just that we're suggesting that they do this, but make sure that free parking at the airport, passes for free parking would be used for, the people they're given to would be used for official government business. You don't give them to your friends when they're going to Europe, or to your kids when they're going on a trip somewhere, or use it for yourself if you're just going on vacation. Because in those cases, those passes could potentially become gifts to officials who would then be required to report them as gifts, which could be very confusing.
I have a follow-up question then. So based on this, then the expectation is that the city then will issue some sort of directive on that?
That's what we're asking for, yes.
And that directive will be their own language, or you've given them a little bit here, but
Yes.
it's up to them. Just say, hey, tell all the people this is only for official business, so there won't be any mix-up, potential mix-up in the future, or someone goes there on anything other than official business.
Or
has the free
criticism of the
parking.
person. Right. Okay, anybody have any objection or any edits?
Just
Mr. Tolleman.
Question, I'm not sure if the, who exactly gets these passes, but is it considered part of their compensation package? Do we know that?
They go to a number of people. I think the city elected officials get them. I know a couple of folks at universities get them. They're not all to city people. They're all to people, as I understand. I don't know the full list, but they're all to people who are here in Tallahassee.
County commissioners, so I mean, it goes to various dignitaries in town that may often park at the airport. I don't believe it's considered an employment perk. For some, it may be, but those that aren't employed by the city also receive them.
As far as I know, they're all government officials who receive them.
But we have no jurisdiction over anybody who's not.
No, we would have no jurisdiction over those people. This came up, an issue you may remember. One of our elected officials there was some concern that they were using the parking pass at the airport for non-city business. This was several months back, and this letter is the result of that.
Okay.
All right, so any other questions? Any objections? So without objection, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, that's done. I'm now going to ask for any comments that anybody in the audience wishes to make before we go into our executive session, which, as I pointed out before, may not be, but may be lengthy. You're recognized.
I'll fill out a card. I wasn't expecting to say anything, but I'm Peter Butzine, 1628 Woodgate Way. On the issue that you were just talking about, I really appreciate your addressing the gift issue. And I suspect that the comments I'm going to make are would be more appropriately made to the City Commission. I just don't understand why the City Commission is subsidizing other governmental entities, because that money is coming from us, the taxpayers of the City of Tallahassee. Why, for instance, should the president of FSU get free parking? Why should a court official get free parking? It may be for very good reasons. I'm sure it is. I mean, those people have to travel for business, but I think that their entity should pay for it, not the people of the City of Tallahassee. But as I say, I can't fault this body for addressing the issue. I think it's an issue that has to come before the City Commission, and we're going to have a new City Commission in a few months, and we will have opportunities to address this accordingly.
And now you have practiced your speech.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butzine. You're recognized, sir.
Good afternoon, members of the board and Mr. Chair. Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform, and on behalf of our coalition, I just wanted to thank Mr. Currington for his service with the board here and wish him well in the future. I didn't always agree with him when he opined on issues, but always respected your opinions, and thank you again.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, what we are going to do is we are going to recess briefly, and we are going to give Mr. Currington a completely, utterly insufficient going away present in appreciation of his sage advice, and then we will go into an executive session on a complaint or complaints that we have recently received. And we will be back at the end of that, but I cannot tell you when we will return. So with that, we are in recess. Mr. Currington. Okay, we have reconvened after, excuse me, after our executive session, and I encourage the board members to correct me where I get things wrong. Basically, our executive session considered one complaint, which we bifurcated into two. It concerned a tweet that congratulated the mayor on winning the Democratic nomination. We first considered that complaint as against the mayor, determined that it was legally sufficient, in other words, that the complaint on its face, read liberally in favor of the complainant, would state a cause that was within the jurisdiction of the board. That does not make any, we did not make any decision in that process about whether the facts supported it or whether anyone had done anything wrong. It was merely the complaint on its face that we evaluated. We then considered the probable cause about whether the complaint met probable cause standard, excuse me. And after reviewing the report of the investigator and getting an independent analysis from a legal advocate, as our bylaws require us to do, determined that there was no probable cause that the mayor had committed any ethical violation. We then proceeded to consider that same complaint as it related to city staff broadly. We believe that because our only jurisdiction is over the 4 appointed city staff members, that it would be that we would have had to read into the complaint that it was against the city manager, who is in charge of communications, which is itself in charge of the city's tweets. But even reading all of that into the complaint, we determined that the complaint was not legally sufficient against the staff, who were in fact the ones we now know who decided to and authorized the sending of the tweet. So again, we found no probable cause against the mayor, and we found no legal sufficiency as against the city manager. Does that meet with everyone's recollection of our meeting? I'm seeing nods. With that, we had a few items remaining on our agenda. We are going to push them to next month. We are adjourned.